In the shadows of steel and ambition, giants rose with fire in their hearts and machines at their backs, daring to challenge the yellow titan that ruled the earth. They built empires from iron, poured fortunes into factories, and swore Caterpillar would not stand unopposed. Yet behind the promises of progress lurked betrayals, feuds, and secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. One by one, those challengers marched into battle, and one by one, they fell. This is not just a story of machines and markets, but of pride, scandal, and the cursed dream of men who believed they could conquer a legend. The giant awakens. In the smoke-filled aftermath of the First World War, as nations rebuilt their shattered cities and farmers struggled to reclaim their fields, a quiet revolution began in the soil of America. It was not born in palaces or universities, but in workshops filled with iron, oil, and ambition. From the uneasy marriage of two bitter rivals, Holt Manufacturing and the CL Best Tractor Company, emerged a name destined to shake the earth: Caterpillar. What should have been a partnership of equals was, in truth, a truce between wounded egos. Benjamin Holt, the pioneer of the track-type tractor, had already seen his invention crawl through Europe's muddy battlefields, hauling artillery where horses could not go. Clarence Leo Best, proud and unyielding, refused to fade into history. Their merger in 1925 was less a vision of unity than an act of survival. Two competitors binding themselves together against economic storms neither could face alone. The new company carried a name that evoked resilience and transformation. Caterpillar was more than branding. It was prophecy. Holt's early tractors, nicknamed for their slow, steady crawl, had proven themselves indispensable in war and reconstruction. The world now looked toward machines that could reshape continents, and Caterpillar positioned itself as the architect of that mechanized future. Yet behind the golden promise lay fragile foundations. The merger left tensions unresolved. Old loyalties divided engineers. Managers whispered of conflicting strategies, and investors questioned whether the company could truly balance innovation with stability. Then came the Great Depression, a storm that threatened to crush even the strongest of industries. Farms went bankrupt, governments froze spending, and thousands of factories fell silent. For Caterpillar, survival meant defiance. Where rivals like Alice Chalmers and International Harvester retreated into austerity, Caterpillar doubled down, expanding research, refining engines, and designing machines that could do the work of dozens of men. The strategy was reckless, almost suicidal, but it reflected a belief that the world would rise again, and when it did, it would rise on steel treads. That gamble paid off. As Roosevelt's New Deal launched monumental public works, the Hoover Dam, vast highways, sprawling airfields, Caterpillar's yellow machines became living symbols of recovery. They carved rivers into concrete veins, reshaped landscapes into monuments of progress, and announced to the world that the age of the horse was dead. By the late 1930s, Caterpillar had transcended agriculture. It had become the machinery of civilization itself. Then war returned. The Second World War turned Caterpillar's factories into arsenals of industry. Bulldozers cleared Pacific jungles for airstrips, tractors hauled artillery across the deserts of North Africa, and diesel engines powered victory in places most Americans could not find on a map. Soldiers came to trust the yellow machines as they trusted rifles. Yet, wartime success came with its own shadows. Union organizers accused the company of exploiting labor to meet contracts. Rivals claimed Caterpillar used government influence to crush competition. Rumors whispered through boardrooms of feuds between executives who still carried scars from the old merger. When peace returned, Caterpillar emerged not merely alive, but ascendant. By the 1950s, its empire stretched across continents. From the rice fields of Asia to the highways of South America, the brand had become synonymous with endurance and power. Politicians courted its favor, and developing nations built their futures on its machines. Yet every empire breeds envy. Competitors watched with clenched jaws as Caterpillar dictated prices, contracts, and dealer networks. In bars and backrooms, plans were drawn. Schemes to undercut prices, to steal engineers to imitate designs. Whispers of espionage drifted through the industry like smoke. But Caterpillar, forged in crisis and hardened in war, was not easily shaken. Its philosophy remained unchanged: precision over haste, strength over speed, and dominance through discipline. Still, the company's rise carried an unspoken question: how long could a single titan rule an industry that others were desperate to reclaim? The awakening of the giant was complete. From fragile beginnings and desperate bargains, Caterpillar had built an empire of steel and diesel. Yet its very success had summoned challengers. Across oceans and continents, rivals sharpened their blades, each dreaming of dethroning the yellow behemoth. The war for the Earth had begun. The challengers emerge. As Caterpillar's yellow empire spread across continents, its shadow stretched long and heavy. For every mile of highway it carved and every dam it raised, 100 rival eyes watched, burning with envy and ambition. To some, Caterpillar was not an inspiration. It was an obstacle, a tyrant of steel and diesel that strangled opportunity beneath its treads. Yet, in the wake of its rise, new challengers stirred, determined to break its monopoly over the Earth itself. The first to step into the ring were old titans with wounded pride. International Harvester, once the undisputed monarch of agricultural machinery, saw in Caterpillar's ascent a direct assault on its crown. Known for its red tractors and sprawling dealer network, Harvester believed its experience in farming gave it an edge. Engineers worked day and night, sketching prototypes of crawler tractors designed to rival Caterpillar's mighty D series. But ambition alone could not match Caterpillar's obsession with durability. Harvester's machines cracked under pressure, their parts failed in distant fields, and their dreams of conquest turned to costly experiments. Then came Alice Chalmers, the bold innovator from Milwaukee. Known for daring designs and fearless engineering, Alice Chalmers believed it could outthink the yellow giant. Its orange machines rolled proudly into construction sites, promising cheaper power and modern efficiency. For a time, they found buyers, contractors eager to rebel against Caterpillar's dominance. But rebellions are fragile. Alice Chalmers struggled to maintain quality. Its dealer network faltered, and whispers spread of breakdowns in the field. Contractors returned to the safety of Caterpillar's iron certainty. Yet the most daring challenger rose not from old blood, but from wartime innovation. In the 1940s, Euclid emerged from Ohio's industrial heart, forging machines built for one singular purpose: earth-moving on a massive scale. Where Caterpillar balanced versatility, Euclid specialized in brute force. Its green behemoths roared through open pit mines and construction sites, hauling mountains of soil. For a moment, it seemed a true rival had arrived. Euclid's name became legend among engineers who valued raw strength over refinement. But even legends are mortal. When General Motors acquired Euclid in 1953, corporate caution dulled its edge. Innovation slowed, bureaucracy strangled ambition, and Caterpillar quietly marched into the same markets with its own superior haulers. The green machines faded into memory. Still, the dream of dethroning Caterpillar refused to die. Across the Atlantic, European challengers emerged. Liebherr in Germany, JCB in Britain, and Fiat Alice in Italy believed the post-war boom would favor local champions. They produced sleek, specialized machines, hoping regional pride would outmatch global power. But Caterpillar's global dealer network, spanning deserts, jungles, and frozen tundra, crushed them in reach and reliability. Wherever a road needed building, a dam needed raising, or a mine needed clearing, Caterpillar was already there. The challengers did not only fight in factories, they fought in boardrooms and courtrooms. Lawsuits over patents, accusations of price fixing, and whispers of corporate espionage filled industry journals. Caterpillar's rivals accused it of leveraging government contracts and military ties to secure dominance. Rumors swirled of spies sent to photograph assembly lines, engineers bribed to reveal blueprints, and secret meetings where alliances were forged in desperation. It was not merely a battle of machines. It was industrial warfare fought in shadows and ledgers. For the workers who built these rival machines, the struggle felt personal. In Ohio, Milwaukee, and Turin, factory floors buzzed with defiance. "We'll beat the yellow beast," they swore, as sparks flew from welders and engines rumbled to life. Yet, for every new model unveiled, Caterpillar unveiled one stronger, faster, more reliable. Its reputation became myth, a company that never broke, never yielded, never rested. By the dawn of the 1960s, the scoreboard was clear. International Harvester retreated, Alice Chalmers staggered under debt, and Euclid, once a rising star, now served under foreign masters. Caterpillar stood unchallenged, its logo a banner of victory flying over every continent. But the war was far from over. In the distance, new threats gathered, foreign powers with government backing, new technologies rising from diesel's ashes, and economic storms that would test even the mightiest machine. For now, the challengers had emerged, but few would endure. The earth remembers those who tried, and those who were crushed beneath its weight. The war of steel and strategy. By the dawn of the 1960s, the battlefield was set. Across continents and industries, the war for dominance in heavy machinery had moved beyond raw horsepower. It was now a war of steel and strategy, fought not only in factories but in boardrooms, dealer lots, and distant construction sites. Every machine rolled out was a soldier, every contract signed, a captured fortress. And at the center of this industrial war stood Caterpillar Incorporated, the yellow colossus that believed victory belonged not to the boldest, but to the most prepared. For Caterpillar, steel was only half the weapon. The other was strategy, a doctrine forged through crisis and sharpened by opportunity. The company's engineers perfected designs for machines that could endure extremes of climate and abuse, bulldozers that conquered jungles, graders that carved roads through deserts, and engines that roared across frozen tundra without faltering. But while rivals obsessed over horsepower and price tags, Caterpillar built something far more lethal: a global logistics empire. Its parts distribution network became a marvel of precision, ensuring that a machine broken in Africa could be repaired within days, while competitors' equipment languished for months. Rivals soon realized they were not fighting a manufacturer, they were fighting a system. Caterpillar trained mechanics across continents, nurtured dealers like generals in a far-flung army, and instilled loyalty with promises of reliability that bordered on religion. To challenge such an empire required not just engineering brilliance but flawless execution, and few possessed both. International Harvester tried to fight fire with fire. Its engineers developed the TD series crawlers, hoping to carve a share of the construction market. The machines were powerful, yet plagued by reliability issues. Bolts sheared, transmissions failed, and operators cursed their fragility. Harvesters' boardrooms grew tense as losses mounted, their once proud brand reduced to a shadow in the earth-moving arena. Alice Chalmers, meanwhile, gambled on innovation. They unveiled experimental hydraulics, new track systems, and lighter frames to undercut Caterpillar's cost. But innovation, rushed and underfunded, turned to weakness. Field failures spread, and customers who once flirted with orange machines returned to the yellow certainty of Caterpillar. Then came General Motors' Euclid division, the fiercest challenger of the decade. Backed by GM's capital and reputation, Euclid's massive dump trucks and haulers dominated mines and quarries. Their bold green fleets threatened to chip away at Caterpillar's supremacy in heavy transport. For a time, it seemed the balance might shift, yet Caterpillar answered with a master stroke of strategy: the introduction of its own line of off-highway trucks, built with the same obsessive durability as its dozers. Within years, Euclid's market share began to bleed. By the late 1960s, antitrust pressures forced GM to divest, and Euclid fell into foreign hands. Its challenge blunted, its empire fragmented. The war was not just industrial, it was psychological. Caterpillar's marketing told stories of resilience and conquest, of machines that never quit. Glossy ads showed bulldozers pushing through monsoons, loaders rising from floods, engines roaring in the shadow of war. Each image whispered the same message: you can trust the yellow iron. For contractors choosing between survival and ruin, that message was gospel. Yet behind the victories, the cost of war was steep. Caterpillar's relentless march demanded precision, discipline, and sacrifice. Engineers labored under crushing deadlines, dealers faced impossible quotas, and unions clashed with management over wages and working conditions. Rumors of burnout, feuds, and espionage rippled through the industry. In one whispered tale, a rival executive allegedly paid an informant to photograph Caterpillar's secret prototypes, only to discover the company had deliberately planted decoys to expose the spy. By the close of the 1970s, Caterpillar's position seemed impregnable. Its machines dominated construction, mining, agriculture, and defense. Rivals who once boasted of revolution now fought for survival, merging, collapsing, or fading into obscurity. The battlefield of steel had been conquered, but victory carried its own peril. Success bred arrogance, and hidden within the machinery of dominance were the seeds of future crisis. For the challengers, defeat was bitter. For Caterpillar, triumph was fragile. The war of steel and strategy had been won, but the empire would soon face storms no amount of planning could contain. Scandals, strikes, and shattered ambitions. By the dawn of the 1960s, the battlefield was set. Across continents and industries, the war for dominance in heavy machinery had moved beyond raw horsepower. It was now a war of steel and strategy, fought not only in factories but in boardrooms, dealer lots, and distant construction sites. Every machine rolled out was a soldier, every contract signed, a captured fortress, and at the center of this industrial war stood Caterpillar Incorporated, the yellow colossus that believed victory belonged not to the boldest, but to the most prepared. For Caterpillar, steel was only half the weapon. The other was strategy, a doctrine forged through crisis and sharpened by opportunity. The company's engineers perfected designs for machines that could endure extremes of climate and abuse, bulldozers that conquered jungles, graders that carved roads through deserts, and engines that roared across frozen tundra without faltering. But while rivals obsessed over horsepower and price tags, Caterpillar built something far more lethal: a global logistics empire. Its parts distribution network became a marvel of precision, ensuring that a machine broken in Africa could be repaired within days, while competitors' equipment languished for months. Rivals soon realized they were not fighting a manufacturer. They were fighting a system. Caterpillar trained mechanics across continents, nurtured dealers like generals in a far-flung army, and instilled loyalty with promises of reliability that bordered on religion. To challenge such an empire required not just engineering brilliance, but flawless execution, and few possessed both. International Harvester tried to fight fire with fire. Its engineers developed the TD series crawlers, hoping to carve a share of the construction market. The machines were powerful, yet plagued by reliability issues. Bolts sheared, transmissions failed, and operators cursed their fragility. Harvesters' boardrooms grew tense as losses mounted, their once proud brand reduced to a shadow in the earth-moving arena. Alice Chalmers, meanwhile, gambled on innovation. They unveiled experimental hydraulics, new track systems, and lighter frames to undercut Caterpillar's cost. But innovation, rushed and underfunded, turned to weakness. Field failures spread, and customers who once flirted with orange machines returned to the yellow certainty of Caterpillar. Then came General Motors' Euclid division, the fiercest challenger of the decade. Backed by GM's capital and reputation, Euclid's massive dump trucks and haulers dominated mines and quarries. Their bold green fleets threatened to chip away at Caterpillar's supremacy in heavy transport. For a time, it seemed the balance might shift. Yet, Caterpillar answered with a masterstroke of strategy: the introduction of its own line of off-highway trucks, built with the same obsessive durability as its dozers. Within years, Euclid's market share began to bleed. By the late 1960s, antitrust pressures forced GM to divest, and Euclid fell into foreign hands. Its challenge blunted, its empire fragmented. The war was not just industrial, it was psychological. Caterpillar's marketing told stories of resilience and conquest, of machines that never quit. Glossy ads showed bulldozers pushing through monsoons, loaders rising from floods, engines roaring in the shadow of war. Each image whispered the same message: you can trust the yellow iron. For contractors choosing between survival and ruin, that message was gospel. Yet behind the victories, the cost of war was steep. Caterpillar's relentless march demanded precision, discipline, and sacrifice. Engineers labored under crushing deadlines. Dealers faced impossible quotas, and unions clashed with management over wages and working conditions. Rumors of burnout, feuds, and espionage rippled through the industry. In one whispered tale, a rival executive allegedly paid an informant to photograph Caterpillar's secret prototypes, only to discover the company had deliberately planted decoys to expose the spy. By the close of the 1970s, Caterpillar's position seemed impregnable. Its machines dominated construction, mining, agriculture, and defense. Rivals who once boasted of revolution now fought for survival, merging, collapsing, or fading into obscurity. The battlefield of steel had been conquered, but victory carried its own peril. Success bred arrogance, and hidden within the machinery of dominance were the seeds of future crisis. For the challengers, defeat was bitter. For Caterpillar, triumph was fragile. The war of steel and strategy had been won, but the empire would soon face storms no amount of planning could contain. Global pressure and foreign fronts. By the 1980s, Caterpillar's empire stretched across oceans and continents, a machine-built colossus whose yellow insignia marked highways in Brazil, mines in Australia, and pipelines in the Middle East. Yet beyond the triumphs of expansion lay a truth the company could no longer ignore. The world itself had become a battlefield, and foreign soil offered not just opportunity, but peril. Each new market carried invisible traps, currency shocks, trade embargoes, political revolutions, and rivals waiting in ambush. What once seemed like a promise of endless growth now revealed itself as a gauntlet of global pressure. Caterpillar entered these foreign fronts with confidence born of conquest. It built factories in Belgium, Brazil, and Japan, formed alliances with local distributors, and trained armies of mechanics fluent in the language of gears and grit. The company's blueprint for dominance seemed foolproof: control production, ensure supply chains, and flood the world with reliability. But the deeper Caterpillar pushed into new markets, the more it encountered enemies it could not simply outbuild. In Japan, Komatsu rose from post-war rubble with precision manufacturing and ruthless efficiency. Their machines were smaller, cheaper, and increasingly durable, embodying a philosophy that quality could be mass-produced at scale. Komatsu's battle cry, Maru Cat, or Encircle Caterpillar, was no empty slogan. They studied Caterpillar's service model, reverse-engineered its parts, and matched its performance while undercutting its prices. In Asia and Africa, Komatsu's advance became a siege, one that forced Caterpillar to fight on unfamiliar ground where loyalty was fleeting and brand mythology meant little to contractors seeking affordability. Meanwhile, in Europe, feuds, the offspring of an uneasy marriage between Italian ambition and American engineering, tried to seize the middle ground. They promised adaptability, speed, and style, but their alliance was fractured by conflicting visions and financial strain. Dealers complained of inconsistent support, and equipment often failed under heavy loads. While feuds sought to challenge the throne, it soon found itself drowning in debt, its ambitions undone by the very complexity it hoped would grant it strength. The battlefield stretched into the oil-rich sands of the Middle East and the jungles of South America, where governments, flushed with petrodollars and aid, demanded fleets of machines for monumental projects. Caterpillar saw these contracts as crowns of conquest, but the rewards came laced with risk. Currency devaluations devoured profits overnight, and shifting political alliances turned yesterday's partners into tomorrow's enemies. In some nations, factories were seized, supply lines disrupted, and shipments stranded in ports by embargo or war. The global empire, once a symbol of stability, now trembled under forces it could not command. Economic winds turned hostile. The soaring dollar made American exports painfully expensive, allowing foreign rivals to swarm into markets where Caterpillar had once ruled uncontested. Reports of lost bids, shuttered plants, and dealer unrest echoed through boardrooms in Peoria. Executives debated strategies, slash costs or double down on innovation, retreat or fight harder. Pride refused surrender. Caterpillar launched new product lines, expanded service guarantees, and poured millions into global marketing campaigns proclaiming, "We build what the world needs." Yet, beneath the confident slogans lay anxiety, the sense that the empire's golden armor was beginning to crack. The global fronts were not just commercial, they were cultural wars. In Asia, loyalty was won not with slogans, but with patience and partnership. In Europe, regulators imposed rules that strangled profit margins. In Latin America, corruption and instability turned contracts into gambles. Each region demanded a different strategy, and every misstep became ammunition for rivals. For the first time, Caterpillar could not dictate the terms of war. It had to adapt or be outmaneuvered. By the decade's end, the once invincible empire faced a siege without borders. Profits dwindled. Labor unrest simmered, and whispers of arrogance haunted executives who had believed the world would bow to yellow steel forever. The challengers, Komatsu foremost among them, were no longer shadows but equals, clawing away at Caterpillar's global crown. The company that had once conquered continents now found itself fighting for every inch of ground it had claimed. The foreign fronts had delivered glory, but also exhaustion. And as the 1980s faded into the storm of the next decade, Caterpillar would discover that the most dangerous battles were no longer fought abroad, but within its own walls. The dominoes fall. The 1980s had tested Caterpillar's empire, but the early 1990s would push it to the brink. What had once been a story of unshakable dominance began to unravel, not in one dramatic collapse, but in a slow, merciless chain reaction. A fall of dominoes that revealed just how fragile even the mightiest machine could be. Markets shifted, currencies collapsed, rivals tightened their grip, and within Caterpillar's own ranks, fractures widened into chasms. For decades, the company had preached reliability as its creed, but now it faced the unrelenting truth. Reliability meant little if the empire itself buckled under its own weight. The first domino fell with the global recession. Projects stalled, governments canceled contracts, and demand for heavy machinery withered. Caterpillar's plants, once roaring with the sound of endless production, stood eerily quiet. Thousands of workers were laid off, and unemployment lines in the Midwest swelled with the men and women who had built the yellow iron. Union anger boiled into open confrontation. Strikes paralyzed factories, picket lines stretched for miles, and management dug in, refusing to yield to demands that threatened already thin margins. The once proud image of Caterpillar as the builder of nations was now overshadowed by nightly news broadcasts showing scuffles between police and striking workers outside locked gates. Rivals seized the opportunity. Komatsu, now emboldened, flooded the market with machines that matched Caterpillar's durability but came at lower cost. Contractors, weary of strikes and part shortages, turned to Japanese suppliers, convinced that the old giant had finally begun to stumble. In Europe, Volvo and Liebherr found new footholds, offering precision engineering and aggressive financing that undercut Caterpillar's position. Dealers, once loyal to Peoria's gospel, quietly hedged their bets, adding rival lines to their lots. The empire of loyalty Caterpillar had spent decades cultivating was eroding, one silent defection at a time. Inside Caterpillar's boardrooms, the mood turned poisonous. Executives clashed over strategy, some arguing for austerity and consolidation, others demanding bold expansion to outpace the rivals. Accusations of mismanagement leaked to the press, and whispers of corruption and favoritism tainted the company's reputation. A particularly damaging rumor suggested that executives had ignored early warnings about Komatsu's rise, dismissing the Japanese firm as a minor nuisance until it was too late. Investors, sensing weakness, began to sell, and Caterpillar's stock price wavered in ways that once seemed unthinkable. The dominoes fell faster. Lawsuits piled up, claims of defective machines, contract disputes, and accusations of anti-competitive practices. Governments that once embraced Caterpillar's presence now demanded stricter regulations, suspicious that the company had grown too powerful. In Latin America, currency crises shredded profit margins, turning once profitable ventures into financial disasters overnight. In Asia, competitors spread rumors of Caterpillar's decline, telling contractors that the yellow giant was on the verge of collapse. For the first time in living memory, the myth of Caterpillar's invincibility cracked, and perception became as dangerous an enemy as any machine in the field. The workers felt the brunt of the crisis. Plants closed, pensions shrank, and families who had spent generations with Caterpillar faced the prospect of losing everything. The strikes grew uglier. Windows were smashed, equipment sabotaged, and managers required escorts to cross picket lines. Newspapers called it the Great Rebellion, a bitter civil war within the empire itself. Caterpillar, which had survived wars and depressions, now seemed at risk of destroying itself from within. Yet amid the chaos, there remained a grim determination. Caterpillar refused to bow, even as domino after domino crashed to the ground. The company tightened its operations, forced through brutal cost-cutting measures, and gambled on new technologies that might restore its edge. Its leaders knew the storm could not last forever, but they also knew survival would demand sacrifices that scarred the company's identity for decades to come. The fall of dominoes was not just the collapse of profits or contracts. It was the erosion of trust, the unraveling of myths, and the revelation that even giants can bleed. The challengers circled, the workers raged, and the empire tottered. For Caterpillar, the 1990s would not be remembered as a decade of conquest, but as a crucible, a trial by fire that threatened to reduce its empire to rubble. The only question left was whether the giant could rise again, or whether it had finally set the stage for its own demise. The cursed dream, lies, losses, and the ghosts of giants. By the dawn of the new millennium, the empire that once shook the earth with iron and ambition found itself haunted, not by its rivals, but by the very ghosts it had created. The dream of domination, forged in steel and fire, had curdled into a curse. Caterpillar had outlived the challengers who dared to rise against it: Euclid, Alice Chalmers, Terex, and so many nameless others. But victory came at a price no balance sheet could record. Beneath the gold of its profits lay a graveyard of broken promises, fallen workers, and the echoes of dreams crushed beneath the treads of its machines. The curse began with pride. For decades, Caterpillar had preached endurance, yet behind the polished ads and smiling executives, the company wrestled with a sickness it refused to name, the weight of its own legend. Scandals trickled from the cracks like oil from an overworked engine. Whispers of bribery and foreign contracts, of safety reports buried to meet production targets, of executives rewarded for silence rather than truth. In South America, journalists uncovered allegations that Caterpillar's equipment had been used in the hands of regimes to uproot villages in the name of progress. In Asia, lawsuits surfaced claiming defective engines had caused catastrophic failures on billion-dollar projects. The company denied everything, yet each denial only deepened the shadows. Inside its boardrooms, ambition turned to paranoia. Leaders obsessed over market share, demanding impossible targets that pushed factories and workers to the edge. Cost-cutting became a creed, and loyalty was measured not in years of service but in the willingness to sacrifice ethics for quarterly gains. Old employees whispered of a black ledger, a hidden record of settlements, accidents, and unspoken compromises made in the name of dominance. The myth of a benevolent giant had fractured, revealing a machine that could not stop moving, even if it crushed its own beneath the weight of progress. The ghosts of the fallen challengers seemed to linger, mocking from the shadows. Alice Chalmers, once a titan, had been dissected and sold. Euclid's green machines lay rusting in forgotten yards. International Harvester's red banners had faded into memory. Each company had fought, clawed, and bled to survive against the yellow behemoth, and each had fallen, not just to Caterpillar's strength, but to the same sickness of overreach, hubris, and unrelenting ambition. The battlefield was littered with their remains, and Caterpillar walked through it alone, the last giant standing in a graveyard it helped create. But the curse did not rest. The 2000s brought new accusations: environmental negligence, tax avoidance schemes, and insider trading investigations. In one of the most infamous scandals, federal agents raided Caterpillar's Illinois headquarters, seizing documents tied to offshore profits and accounting manipulations. Executives maintained innocence, yet shareholders trembled, and the public began to question whether the yellow paint still symbolized strength or greed. Meanwhile, workers spoke of declining morale, of safety corners cut to meet impossible quotas, of pensions eroded while executives reaped millions in bonuses. The company that once built the world now seemed built upon the bones of those it left behind. Even the heirs of the founders were not spared. Families torn apart by lawsuits and inheritance battles, descendants feuding over the legacy of men who had dreamed of machines that would serve mankind. Letters and memoirs unearthed from dusty archives told stories of regret, of pioneers who had envisioned progress but lived to see corporations worship profits above purpose. The dream that began in mud and machinery had turned into a labyrinth of lies, where truth was bartered like steel and the past refused to stay buried. And yet, despite every ghost and scandal, Caterpillar endured. Its machines still thundered across deserts and jungles, building nations even as they carried the sins of their maker. Perhaps endurance was its final curse, to live forever, never forgiven, never forgotten. The Yellow Titan had conquered every rival, but in doing so, it had become something else entirely. Not a builder of dreams, but a monument to the peril of unchecked ambition. The curse of the giant was not its fall, but its survival. In the silence that followed decades of war, scandal, and triumph, one truth remained: the earth remembers. The trenches dug by Caterpillar's blades were not just in soil, but in history, etched deep with the weight of every lie, every loss, every soul consumed in the relentless pursuit of the dream.